Yeah, now we are.
So this is an approach into Salt Lake in a CRJ that I shot. So I'll let you guys listen to it just a minute.
Any clears land, that's fine. My recall's at 49.60. It's a lot lower further down the field, though. It's turning into snow. 500 mil. 500 mil. Yeah, it's just turning to snow. It didn't really help, did it?
Minimums. 100. 50. 40. 30. 20. 10.
Oh, dang it, I did hold the rope.
Not bad, huh? So that's what it looks like to fly into Salt Lake on a crappy weather day. That's a video I took, so you like those windshield wipers?
Gave me anxiety.
He busted up laughing so hard. It's like, what's the point, right? What's the point of these wipers? They do absolutely nothing. Okay. So this is a sheet that I'm just going to post on today's lesson plan here in the Google Drive. This is just some of the specifications of the CRJ. We'll talk about the things that you really need to know on this, but this just kind of gives you an introduction to the overall length and size of the aircraft, as well as like, you know, your ramp weights, fuel weights, how much fuel you can put on board, the different speeds that it's capable of, the range, things like that. So that's just kind of an introduction to the aircraft, but this is the beautiful PowerPoint we get to go over today. So the CRJ 700. So this is basically what a CRJ is has anybody heard of a Challenger private jet, corporate jet?
Yeah.
Yeah. So all this is a Challenger that they put bigger engines on it, and then cut the fuselage just forward of the wings and extended the fuselage out to accommodate more seats. That's pretty much how the CRJ 700 came about. It's pretty good looking aircraft, actually. Okay, so just some general information about the aircraft. This is the type. So this is what we see when we pull up any information on the CRJ 700. We don't see CRJ 700. We'll see CL 600 2C10. And that's the type of aircraft it is. That's its code, basically. It was a collaborative effort from manufacturers in multiple countries. We got General Electric, and when we talk power plant, that means the engines. So in aviation, we don't call them engines, we call them power plants. Avcorp did the vertical and horizontal stabilizers. Who remembers what those are? This section.
The tail.
Yeah, the tail. So remember, if we cut the aircraft off right here, that's called the empennage. And the vertical and horizontal stabilizers make up the empennage. So that was Avcorp. Manasco Aerospace did the landing gear, Rockwell Collins did the avionics, and then Allied Signal did the APU, or auxiliary power unit. The dimensions, Total overall length of 106 feet, 8 inches, wingspan 76 feet, 3 inches. Overall height is 24 inches, so that's from the ground to the top of the tail. Or 24 feet, 10 inches. And the main passenger door sill is only 4 foot 7 off the ground, eliminating the need for an escape slide. So the door has stairs mounted into it. So yeah, it's just like a private jet, you know. Not nearly as luxurious. But anyways, pavement width required for a 180-degree turn is 75 feet. So there you go. So wingspan is from the very tip. These little things that you see here on modern day aircraft, call those winglets. And we'll talk a little bit about the aerodynamics of the wing, but basically it helps prevent the wing prior to the winglet being invented and put on these aircraft. The usable wing was only about to right here, and then this whole part of the wing basically wasn't producing lift because of how the air spilled off the wing. So what they did is somebody figured out that if you flip the tip of the wings up like that, basically all of a sudden your usable wing surface is all the way out almost to the very end of the wing, because it prevents the air just spilling off the edge of the wing. So kind of interesting. But yeah, your wingspan is from the tip of the wingtip to the tip of the wingtip, outermost points. And then, like I said, from the ground to the top of the tail, and then from the very back of the horizontal stabilizer to the tip of the nose. Oops. I just got a text from Adam saying that the air traffic controller stuff's up, so we're going to go and jump into that instead really quick, since we just barely started that PowerPoint. Because this kind of finishes off our navigation section. Okay, so
that doesn't mean any more questions, Ash.
Yeah, we won't throw any of this stuff on here, but it is important to know the structure of the air traffic control system. So, so in air traffic control, we talk about centers. I know the video talked about the en route centers. You can see ZLC covers all of that area. I think it's the second largest in the nation. I think Minneapolis is the largest, and I think Salt Lake is right behind it. It's pretty close between the two. But yeah, these are the abbreviations for the different centers. So these air traffic control, you'll see it abbreviated ARTCC. That's Air Route Traffic Control Center. And this just shows you the real estate for each one of those different centers. So I've got a lot of cousins that actually do air traffic control for the Salt Lake Center. One that does what we call TRACON, which we'll talk about, and then another cousin that's doing en route for DFW. So, and as you can see, St. George is actually under the Los Angeles Center. So when you take off from St. George, you go over, what do people call it? Big Mountain? Piney? What do people call that? That mountain to the north?
Pine Valley.
Pine Valley.
Pine Valley Mountain. Pine
Yeah.
Mountain.
Yeah, just as you get past Pine Valley Mountain, you transfer over. They send you over to Salt Lake Center. So kind of interesting. So these are your Mexico centers. So this is just a kind of a overview of the air traffic control national airspace system. Let's see. So here's something that is very important that I want you guys, it's not going to be on a test, but I need you guys to understand how air traffic control works. So even before we get to the tower here, we actually have two different, okay, so I'm going to actually extend this out a little bit. So before we even get to where we're talking to the guys up in the very top of the tower here, we talk to clearance delivery. So what these guys do is they look at your flight plan and they look at the time that you've scheduled to depart. And basically, when we talk to clearance delivery is going to say, that everything's in the system, and we, on our flight plans, we put in an estimated time of arrival. So what happens is when we put that in, these guys are basically the ones that start the stopwatch. So they're the ones that say, okay, we've got your flight plan, everything looks good. Basically, you're cleared to proceed as filed. And so these are before we start taxiing, before we push back, anything like that. First, we got to get approval from clearance delivery that our flight plan is good. And then they start that stopwatch, because what is going to happen on the back end here is basically they're going to monitor, air traffic control monitors us until we touch down on the ground, and they want to make sure we get there safely. And so that stopwatch, and when we start the talking to clearance delivery, start that stopwatch, basically we have to be to our destination, and if we're late more than 30 minutes, then they start asking air traffic control. They've got this whole emergency procedure that they go through to make sure that we're still okay, because they don't want, time is a good indicator if there was a problem. We're pretty accurate with our time, and it's a pretty good indicator that there's something wrong going on that could be hazardous. So these guys are just kind of like, okay, everything looks good, checks out, start the stopwatch. Then we talk to ground. Okay. Ground controllers, they sit up in the top of the tower, and their job is to make sure that everything down on the ground doesn't hit each other. They're moving you, if you've got to go over runways and things like that, they're the ones that are telling you, okay, you can cross the runway now, you can do this now, and they get you to the runway. Okay. So these guys, we talk to ground, they tell us when we're good to push back from the gate. They tell us when we can taxi, what direction, what taxiways we're allowed to taxi on. They're the ones that make sure that, you know, the cars that are bringing food to the airplanes aren't interfering with the operations of the aircraft. Things like that. So they're in charge of all the ground movement. Okay. Once we get to the runway that we are going to take off from, we talk to the tower. Okay. So I guess it shows it here, but here's our clearance delivery, and then ground control, and then we talk to departure. And what departure does is they're the ones that are in charge of telling us when we're good to take off and land. They're in charge of you know, keeping just in that 5-mile radius around the airport, keeping everybody separated. So when one plane's landing and they're telling the other guy to take off, they're timing it to where, you know, if this guy has to do a missed approach, he's not going to interfere with the guy taking off, and so on and so forth. Okay, so their job is that immediate 5-mile radius around the airport. Okay, once you get out of that 5 miles, we talk to TRACON. Okay, TRACON is down here at the base of the tower. They sit in a dark, moldy room, and that's actually, you know, my cousin's down here sitting on a computer watching a radar screen. They're the ones that are doing everything that's that 18,000 feet and below within that 30-mile area around that main airport. Okay. So Salt Lake City's are where they sit for us, and they're just sitting there keeping everybody spaced, all the VFR traffic out of the way of the IFR traffic. They're providing separation for all of the IFR traffic, making sure everybody's lining up for our arrivals, making sure everything's lining up real smooth, and so the guy that's doing the arrivals can just, you know, make sure that they're safe when they touch the ground. But then, so 5 to 40 miles from the airport, and it says 10,000 feet here, but yeah, they'll even take care of traffic out in like Ogden and stuff like that. When the tower closes, they'll help traffic out in Ogden and stuff like that. So it just depends on the different TRACONs, but just as a standard, once again, I guess the 10,000 feet and 40 miles from the airport. So air route traffic control centers. These are the guys that are controlling all of our IFR traffic up at high altitudes. Okay, they've got to keep everybody even further apart. They divide each of these airspaces that we looked at up here. Let's see. So, you know, they'll take and they'll divide these sectors up even more. They'll have like one guy watching this sector, another guy here, and then they've got another guy watching this. So that's just kind of how it looks. It's like a spider web of different sectors, and each controller has a separate sector that they're watching and providing that spacing for. Because remember, air traffic control's job is just to make sure that everybody's spaced out properly and lining up the way they need to. So air route traffic control, their job really, you know, when we talk about the final stage here and arrivals, really it starts here. When you're 100 plus miles out from the airport, they're already sequencing this, you know, LA center. You know, here's LA down here. This guy's up in Salt Lake Center's control. You've got a guy down here. You got a guy over here. You got a guy right here. They're sequencing these aircraft, all of these different aircraft, to arrive and be sequenced and properly spaced out for that 40 nautical mile circle around LA that Tracon is taking care of, and then Tracon just brings them in even closer for just as the final touches, basically. So these guys are the ones that are looking way, way, way down the road and making sure everything's sequenced going into the airport. But after we get out of this en route environment, we go back into the Tracon and then back to the tower. So it's just exact reverse of this. They got to close out their flight plan once they get on the ground and everything like that. So, but yeah, I mean, everything is planned way in advance, and their job is pretty much just to provide that sequencing that's necessary, so we don't have planes colliding.
Will we be responsible for communicating with them at any point in this process?
There's times where we do need to contact air traffic control. Like if we cannot contact one of our airplanes, then, you know, we have the ability to contact air traffic control. But typically our interface with air traffic control is helping them with their flow. So every single hour at every airline, air traffic control, they talked about it in the video. They talked about where everything's based in Virginia, the air route, what is it, the ARTCSC. Basically what happens is they're kind of like the main hub for air traffic control. So each one of the different zones, each one of those different Hold on just a second. Sorry, my daughter had a very important question to ask me. Anyways, where was I at? I was talking about the different centers. Oh, okay. So each one of the different centers that you see up here, they'll each call into the main hub in Virginia. And then every hour, this main hub in Virginia will do a conference call with every one of the major airlines and a bunch of the regional airlines. And in that conference call, they'll talk about different constraints that they have in each one of these different center boundaries. Like it'll talk about specific airports. They'll say LaGuardia is going to be going into a ground delay program, expected to go into ground delay program from this time to this time. San Francisco is expected to go into a ground delay program from this time to this time. We're seeing terminal constraints over Chicago O'Hare due to low ceilings. They're expecting these ceilings to clear out by this time. And then they'll go through and they'll do a brief on any of the airports that are having big problems and not having a normal day, like a normal good day. If there's nothing to report, those calls are really, really short. But if there's like really bad weather over certain parts of the country, or, you know, something happens to where an airport shuts down or something like that, they will address those in each one of the conference calls. And the supervisor is in charge of being at every one of those conference calls every hour. So the supervisor, they'll sit in on the conference call. They'll also talk to the different airlines, and they'll get, they'll be like, Delta, do you have any questions? United, do you have any questions? Southwest, do you have any questions? Like, they'll go through each one of the different airlines, and they'll be like, are there any questions that we can answer? Any concerns? Do we need to make an exception for this or this? But yeah, the supervisors sit in on those calls, and then they relay any of the important information from that call to us on the floor as dispatchers. And that's pretty much our interaction with air traffic control, is we're making sure that we're helping, our flights are going in at the times they need to go in. And if there's any issues, that we're giving our pilots enough fuel to hold over the airport for a certain amount of time, or, things like that. So we're working with air traffic control, but basically the supervisor's the one that's actually directly in contact with ATC. So it takes some of the workload off of us as dispatchers. So A lot of this I'm just going to leave for you guys to read, but I just wanted to go over some of this important stuff that we've been talking about. It's important to know the different centers and then how it works, basically. But we'll talk about some of the other important things. So you can see basically the normal communication process. So the pilot's doing most of the communication, and then the traffic manager, just look at that as our supervisor. So they're the ones that are in the direct contact with the controller. The dispatcher's either talking to the controller through the pilot or the traffic manager. But I call ATC probably 15 times a day. It's just when I'm calling them, I'm talking to flight data is what it's called. But what they're in charge of is that air traffic control strip. Did you guys see that on the video? Those strips that they kept moving around. You guys see those?
Yes.
Okay, so those strips all have that information about the aircraft, what they're capable of doing, what kind of avionics they have on board, what are they capable of RVSM, are they capable of GPS, are they capable of RNAV, PBN, all of that stuff they want to know. So whenever we have to make a change to our air traffic control strip, we contact flight data, because when we send a release to our aircraft and to operations, and then we send an air traffic control strip to ATC, and it gives a time that we plan to take off, and then that equipment list that I told you. So
I mentioned in that video that strip is redundancy or backup.
Yeah, just in case their screen shuts down or whatever. They also write on them too. They'll write a lot of information on them. Let's see. I'm gonna quickly pull up a release for you guys, and just show you what the strip, the ATC strip looks like. I mean, I think I already showed you guys, but all right. So if you look right here, oops, this is the strip. This is the information that we send to air traffic control. So this tells us this is the flight plan for SkyWest 7394 or IFR, okay, and it's a scheduled service. This tells them the type of aircraft. This is a CRJ 200, and then this is all of our equipment list, okay. This tells them things like, we've got ACARs with a printer, GPS equipped, RNAV equipped, we're RVSM certified, things like that, okay. SGU, This is our departure airport, and this is what time we plan on departing at. Okay. This right here, that's our filed speed. So this is the speed that we plan to fly at. And that's in ground speed. Okay. So 448 knots. But what we see in the aircraft is probably more like 285 is our indicated airspeed, but really we're moving about 448 knots across the ground. Okay. This tells them the flight level that we want to fly at, 27,000 feet. And then this is our IFR flight plan. So we're planning on departing from St. George Airport on the HIVCA 2. Our transition point from the HIVCA, so this is our SID. Our transition point is Uriah. Okay. So this is the VOR or the intersection, I'm sorry, the intersection that we plan to exit our SID. This DCT stands for direct, and Milford VOR is our transition point for the Delta 5 arrival. So Delta 5 arrival into Salt Lake City. And this is our star. Okay. Transition point, star. This is our destination airport, and this is our estimated time en route. So we plan it to take 45 minutes to get from St. George to Salt Lake. And then this tells us that we're PBN certified. This tells us, type of navigation equipment that we can use right there. And then our aircraft type, our aircraft serial number, tail number. So that is the information that air traffic control gets. Now let's say that we call up and all of a sudden we've added a whole bunch of fuel on. We're a whole lot heavier, and there's a maintenance delay. We have to call air traffic control, and we've got to change this time if there's any delays or if this ever changes. We also, if there's any changes to the speed that we plan to fly or the flight level, really any of this information, if we're going to change it, then we have to let air traffic control know, because they need to know how to handle this aircraft.
Garrett, question?
You're
showing the KSLC 0045 is the travel time to and from. Is that from the time it's wheels off the ground to touchdown, or is that from pushback?
That's wheels off the ground, so wheels up. So 45 minutes en route, that's the second we lift off the runway to the second we plan to touch down on the runway. So yeah, sometimes we have to call and tell them to pull the strip out of the system because we got to change our aircraft number. We do a swap, and all of a sudden we're not flying that airplane anymore. We're flying a different one. So that's the actual strip that gets sent to air traffic control. Okay. So let's talk about some of the different techniques they use to help keep aircraft sequenced in the sky. So we can see here miles and trail. This talks about miles and trail. basically they're going to space the aircraft a little bit. So they'll start slowing down airplanes or speeding up certain airplanes to increase the space between the two aircraft. Okay. We also have minutes and trails, so they basically do the same thing, but the difference is you're transitioning from a non-radar environment. So those are two of the different sequences that we'll do, that they'll do to space out airplanes. They'll also put them in to help with those miles and trails. They'll tell one aircraft not just to slow down, but to start doing S turns. So they'll give them a vector or a heading. And they'll say, you need to fly this heading for 2 minutes, and then they'll give them a new one that's, 90 degrees opposite. So it's like they're just kind of like slowing them down by turning them. And this talks about some of the questions that this is like in a question format. So please read it. It'll be really good. And as usual, Adam's highlighted some of these sections to kind of help you identify more important topics. So, capping, they'll just basically, instead of clearing them to their selected altitude, that 27,000 feet that we filed, they'll cap them, and they'll just say, you know what, you're going to fly at 15,000 feet for about 10 minutes, and then we'll clear you up to your 27,000 feet. So just different ways to slow aircraft down or to create some space. Also talks about this, what if I don't have enough fuel? What pilots forget is that if they don't have enough fuel, they can reject any one of these clearances. So if ATC gives them something that they can't do, air traffic control can't necessarily see that they only have 1,800 pounds of fuel on board and they need to get on the ground. Maybe the guy behind them has a lot more fuel and is able to hold a lot longer than the guy that, our guy. And so all these pilots have to do is, if they're running out of fuel, they can call over the radio and say, I don't have enough fuel. I can't do 2 loops of holding. And air traffic control can, deal with that. But a pilot always has the right to refuse air traffic control requests, because the pilot is in the cockpit and can see what's going on. Air traffic control's just sitting in a tower looking at a radar screen or sitting in a nice warm building. So some of the other techniques, this tunneling, you see this going into like LaGuardia. What they'll do is they'll have an airplane descend way out away from the airport. They'll descend them, and then they'll just put them on a real low approach into the airport and keep the other guys up high, because the guy that drops down low typically will get to the airport a little bit quicker than the guy that's up high. So GDPs. Now, I've used this a lot to tell you guys. Ground delay programs. So a ground ground delay program, we file this time, right? So we're telling air traffic control, this is what we call a proposed time, or P time. Did I still not grab? Okay. So when we file this time right here, we are telling air traffic control, hey, we plan to have our wheels up at 21:16. Okay? When we go into a ground delay program, let's say San Francisco is our destination, and San Francisco is in a ground delay program. What they'll do is they'll say, okay, we understand your proposed time is 21:16, but we, due to sequencing of aircraft, like I said, a lot of this sequencing happens way before we're ever even close to the airport we're landing at. So to help sequence the airplanes coming into the airport, basically they'll say, we understand this is your proposed time, but we're going to give you a time of 22:15 to take off. And what we have to do is at 21:16, we get everything ready just as normal. They can delay the boarding of the airplane just a little bit, but at 22:15, we have a 5-minute window before and after. So a total of 10 minutes from this time right here to be off the ground. And if we're not, our time gets moved to the back of the bus. So all of a sudden we'd have a time of 23:45. We have to leave in this window. So what they'll usually do is they'll board them a lot earlier. So, originally they were going to board this airplane at 20:46, so 30 minutes prior to departure. They'll board this aircraft. They'll just delay the boarding to like 21:30 to give them 45 minutes to board and get out to the runway. So you'll see airplanes just sit at the end of a runway in what we call the timeout box until that 10-minute window, and then as soon as they get that opportunity, they get out of there as quickly as they can. So
obviously you have to plan for fuel for that delay.
yeah, so the entire point of the ground delay program is to not have any holding. On a normal operation going into an airport, they want to have as little of that airtime holding as they possibly can. But sometimes we just plan for it to take a little bit longer to get into an airport. And so we'll add that hold fuel, right? The entire point of the ground delay program is to make it so there's no airborne holding. They want to slow down the flow of planes coming into the airport to where they don't have to hold anybody in the air. And a lot of times it really works. A lot of times you can still get in with the same exact fuel load with no problems, but there are times where a ground delay program's being managed really poorly because they keep having hiccups with weather or whatever's causing the ground delay program. And so they'll have to put a couple planes into airborne holding. But for the most part, they do pretty good at, being effective with the ground delay program. So a lot of times what a captain will do is they'll just say, hey, give me an extra couple £100 for taxiing, because they'll sit in that timeout box with the engine running. you know. So you'll see a little bit of extra taxi time sometimes, just to allow them to hang out at the end of the runway. But typically no extra hold for the actual, ground delay program. So we also have what we call a ground stop. So typically what we'll see with a ground stop is they expect to have, or they're not really necessarily expecting a ground delay program, but all of a sudden the weather changes really rapidly. Or let's say an airplane does a wheels up landing at an airport. They'll stop everybody that's on the ground within a certain radius of that airport and say, there's an issue. We're going into a ground stop, which means the airplanes that are on the ground cannot depart. If you're going to that airport, you cannot take off until they've lifted the ground stop. So ground delay programs, they'll still flow everybody in slowly. Ground stop, absolutely nobody takes off for that airport within a certain radius of the airport. So this is what the flow chart looks like for different airports. So this is LaGuardia. You can see these are down here on the bottom. These are times, okay? 1200, 1300, 1400. So this is in hour increments. This is the number of airplanes they can land safely for each one of those times, okay? So you'll see this for every one of our bigger airports. You'll see, we can get 40 aircraft in during this time. And a lot of it depends on which way the winds are going or what the weather's doing at the airport. So this is we call this arrival demand chart. You can see that there's certain hours where they have more planes than they can technically handle. Like this hour, they have 45 planes that they can't necessarily, 5 extra planes that, this is when you're going to see stuff like that miles in trail, or, they'll start slowing people coming into the airport, maybe even put them into a holding pattern to slow them down and sequence them in. But you can see that there's times where it jumps up above this, what they're capable of doing in an hour. So it's times like that where we have to start planning for extra fuel, right? We expect there to be some sort of slowing them down, some adjustment to the speed, and some sort of delay one way or another going into the airport. So we add in a little extra fuel to accommodate for that. You can see that this, just to help you guys read it, this is the current time, right? You can see it here too, 13:25. So this is the time bar. This is what time it is currently. This is this line here. That's their maximum aircraft per hour line. So that's the line that tells them how many they can bring in. This black area here, this is planes that have landed. So you can see that there's still one plane that was expected in this hour, still hasn't landed, and he's fallen into this next hour. You can see also that there's several planes that have already landed. So these are planes that are in the air on their way to LaGuardia. The green is planes that are still on the ground but are taking off and going to LaGuardia. So you can see the black is on on the ground safely at the airport. Red is in the air on the way to the airport, and green is on the ground waiting to depart for the airport. This brown is when we go into a ground delay program. So they want to start going into the ground delay. So this is all the aircraft that are affected by the ground delay program. Okay. These are all aircraft. You can still see that there's some that are green. All the aircraft that are in brown are basically, they have what we call an edict time. And that's talked about, right here. So the EDCT time, aircraft must depart within plus or minus 5 minutes of their EDC time to be in compliance with the ground delay program. If you do not think you can make your assigned time, or if you need to request an earlier or later time, then contact clearance delivery or the tower at the departure airport. So, very important to know. And this just goes over some of the different ground delay programs. Air traffic control has a website to give out our edict times. They'll post them. The air traffic control website actually posts our time. We give them the proposed time. We still have to file everything as normal, but air traffic control will change the actual wheels up time. So edict time, just think of it as wheels up time. Okay. I also have time-based flow management. Just ways to keep everybody spaced out and sequenced. These flow programs, this is where the thing that comes to me is Denver. If we go into a west flow into Denver, meaning the aircraft are now approaching the airport from the west rather than their standard of the east. It really slows down how many airplanes Denver can take in an hour. So they'll go from being able to handle 70 planes an hour down to being able to only have handle 35, 40 planes an hour. So west flows are really bad for Denver. So these flow programs, what they'll do is it's kind of like a ground delay, but it's not exactly a ground delay. It gives a suggested edict time to meter the demand. But anyways, yeah, just go through this document. It'll go into a little greater detail about these different programs, but and basically the regulations for those. Delays. So basically what they're talking about here is they want to reduce or mitigate delays because of what it does to our flow into different airports. So if you think about like if you're a customer and you're trying to get on an airplane and all of a sudden there's this huge delay because the pilot hasn't made it to the airport yet. That's really bad business. You're expecting to be somewhere at a certain time, and a lot of times we have several passengers trying to make connections to different airplanes. So that's how it affects our customer. Air traffic control is our customer as well. If they expect a certain number of aircraft to be landing at their airport during a window, and all of a sudden we have 15 planes get delayed out to the next hour, and the next hour was already high, all of a sudden they have an extra 15 planes that they're going to try to have to accommodate. So they really want to mitigate that delay time, not only for our customers that pay, but also for air traffic control because of the demand and the workload that we can put on them. So let's talk about tiers real quick. Whenever there's a ground delay or some sort of program issued, you have tiers. So as you can see here, this would be like, think of it as, so if they call out a 2-tier, they say there's a ground delay program in effect for the New York ATC Center. So you have the New York ATC Center right here. And it's a 2-tier, so you got a ZNY2. Okay. What they're talking about is every single one of the centers directly touching that New York center. That's our first tier. Okay. So they are directly affected by the ground delay program. And when we have a ZNY2, so a 2-tier program, it affects every one of the centers that touch this first tier. So everybody that's in this part of the country can still depart for a New York airport at its normal proposed time. The ground delay does not affect them, but it does affect everybody that is in those first 2 tiers. So everybody in these first 2 tiers, if you're going to New York, you now get an edict time to depart for your New York airport. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, good. So, whenever we see these ground delay programs come out, we need to make sure that we're making sure that if our aircraft is affected by the ground delay program, that we're checking and we're giving them a wheels up time or an edict time. Or B, that we're even affected by the ground delay to begin with. There was one time that there was an LA ground delay program that affected only aircraft in the LA area, and I had a guy in San Francisco waiting to take off for LA, and he's like, am I good to take off yet? It's like 15 minutes after when he was supposed to be taking off, and it's like, yeah, you were supposed to take off 15 minutes ago. Well, what about the ground delay program in LA? Well, it doesn't affect you because you're not in LA Center. So you just need to be cognizant of what's actually being affected in the ground delay programs or in these different programs that they issue. So the OIS, let's see if it'll pull up. So this is the air traffic control website. Okay. And this is the website we work at or use at work and everything. So we have just a whole bunch of different information concerning all these different airports and what the plans are for these different airports. This site's missing a lot of information because you actually have to be subscribed to, you have to be a regional or a major subscribed to the air traffic control system to see it all. But yeah. But you can see, like, here there's some delays coming out of Philadelphia. They're expecting an extra 15-minute delay until this time. Things like that. They'll list out these national programs, ground stops, airport closures. They'll list them out as they happen. So. They'll also issue advisories. We get a lot of advisories every day. They have a program on this OIS system called advisory threading. And basically it'll pop up a screen every time there's a new GDP, ground stop, AFP, route information, any advisories that they have, any facility outages, volcanic activity, because we don't want us flying into volcanic ash, right? And then, stump times. Or stump programs. Anyways, yeah. This system is basically air traffic control, how we get a lot of our information. We can also see, like, our arrival demand charts, see what airports are busy and what ones aren't, and things like that. This gives us some different tools we can go to for weather. When there's anti-icing and de-icing, we can get some information as far as, like, are they doing it at that airport, or what times are they doing it, or how long is the delay averaging for de-icing, things like that. These swaps, severe weather avoidance plans, we see these a lot in summers. And a swap is basically where they're just routing around, they're giving routes around severe weather. So they want you to, when you send them that air traffic control strip, they want you to plan a route that they specifically give. So preferred routes, we see these a lot in places like LaGuardia, stuff like that, where they want you to file specific routes to help the controllers deal with the amount of demand that they have at the time. So we see these a lot. These coded departure routes, these have to be filed. So If they say that these CDRs are out for an airport, let's say Dallas Fort Worth, they want you to file a CDR. If you do not file a CDR, they will reject your flight plan. So you have to comply with these coded departure routes. But basically, it just changes the routing. They want you, if you're departing this way, you have to file this route. If you're departing, this way, you have to file this one. So it just depends on which direction we're leaving the airspace. They want you to file specific routes. And the national playbooks, this is for stuff when it's like a coded departure route, but this is for arrivals. So our playbooks, they want you to fly a specific route. Our coded departure routes are only on departures. So this is getting to the en route environment. You have to fly a specific route. Once you're in the en route environment, everything can go as normal. The playbooks are the opposite end. So they want everybody to enter the airport or the terminal environment from very specific routes. So when they issue these out, we have to comply with them, though. That's the important thing. We already talked about the NRP just a little bit, North American Route Program. But this just gives you a little bit more information on it. Priority handling. Priority handling is things like, VIP movement. We also have medical medevac flights. On SkyWest, we'll even have medevac flights sometimes. But basically what happens is, let's say that they decide to throw some blood on an airplane to transport to a different state or wherever they want to send it, or even organs for transplants or whatever they plan on putting on the aircraft. If there's a medical purpose for it, we can call ATC and say this flight is now a medevac flight, and air traffic control will say okay, and they give them priority handling. So basically they're going to whenever the pilot requests a higher altitude, they're going to give it to them. Whenever, as long as it's not like not safe, they're going to allow them. They're never going to hold the aircraft or anything like that. It's going to be their number one on the list. Okay. Diversion recoveries. Whenever an aircraft diverts, we have to get them to the airport they were supposed to land at. So whenever we are trying to recover, a diversion recovery, that's when we see these diversion recoveries. So they'll just do what they can to help accommodate those aircraft getting into their original intended destination. Here's a list of your high density air traffic airports. So John F. Kennedy, JFK, Ronald Reagan, DCA, LaGuardia, LGA, Chicago, ORD, and Newark, EWR. And the only one of those that does not suck to fly into is O'Hare. O'Hare is very good at what they do, and they will get, you'll see like 15 flights on top of what they can normally do in an hour. You'll see them be like 15 flights over their arrival demand, and you will not see any holding whatsoever. They'll still get them in. Like, they're really, really good at Chicago. And yeah, they're like the busiest, one of the busiest airports in the country, if not the busiest. But that's pretty much it as far as what I wanted to go over with air traffic control. This kind of talks about how they name airports. Sometimes you have airports that aren't necessarily like South Valley Regional Airport up here in Salt Lake. It doesn't have like a K SVR, it's identified KU42. So this just tells you how they identify that airport, the reason why they do that. This is the NRS waypoint system that I was telling you guys about. This is where every one of those waypoints are at. So you can see here, we were talking about navigation. We were talking about GPS waypoints. And GPS waypoints are great and all, but these are even better. These line up with your lines of longitude and latitude every minute, every 30 minutes of latitude, okay, and 2 degrees of longitude. So you can see this grid system covers the entire United States, and it is amazing. When we're route building, we can go and build a route that, do whatever we want using NRS waypoints. Love them.
How do you avoid other traffic that might be on that same custom designed route using points?
Yeah, so a lot of times it's just air traffic control that's going to be keeping the sequencing and separation there. But when we use these NRS waypoints, typically when we use them, let's say we're flying from Denver to Salt Lake, we have a route that goes like this, already in the system, and then comes into Salt Lake. But let's say there's a big old storm system right here, a big old storm cell, and we have to build a new route to get around that storm system. We can just use these NRS waypoints to get us around the weather and then back on the other course. So the NRS waypoints help us just deviate around things. Does that make sense? We're not going to file a flight plan that's just like pure NRS waypoints. They're just there to help us with route building. Really, a lot of it is just, yeah, I mean, exactly what I just said. There's weather in the way. We'll plan 2 NRS waypoints to get it around the weather. It's just a lot more efficient than trying to find a ground-based navigational aid or a GPS waypoint that's off of a published jet route or Victor route. These NRS waypoints help out a lot with that. So, Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. But yeah, read this, love it, do whatever you need with it. That's
Could we do a bathroom or dinner break?
yeah, let's do a dinner break here. Let's just jump back on at 8:30 and finish out the class. Sound good?
Yeah.
You said 8:30?
Yep. Does that work?
8:40.
Okay,
Must
8:40.
be fast food.
I'm
Okay,
good
cool.
with 8:40.
Thanks.
Yep, thank you. All right, is everybody there?
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
So let's just finish off this class.
That day. Jazz.
Oh, did they just lose?
Yep.
Well, if you know, James Harden wasn't such a floppy bugger. It's kind of sad. I mean, the NBA is really making the game unwatchable anymore. I can't stand watching it. But they allow stupid stuff to happen where the game's just not even fun to watch anymore. But anyways, that's my rant.
I'm a Golden State fan, so I'm good.
You're still in it. Well, I hope your players use the Spurs tactic on James Harden and just keep their hands up the entire time, just high above their head. That way, they don't get the fouls called on them, you know. But anyways, smoke alarms going off. Fun. Anyways, let's see. All right. So we started going over the CRJ 700 here. Just trying to think of a better way of finishing off class tonight, because this is a really long PowerPoint that's probably going to take all class. Why don't we... So tonight I've given you guys the homework for this air traffic control to read this, right? I'm going to give you one more piece of homework, and then I guess we can call it a night. Just because it's like, I mean, we're already at 9 o'clock almost. So what I want you guys to do, and if you already know it, then great. But if not, oops. If you do not know the phonetic alphabet, this is your homework for tonight on top of the air traffic control. So I'm just going to screenshot this and put it on the Google Drive. The phonetic alphabet is the alphabet that we use in aviation. Whether you're a pilot talking to air traffic control, talking to the cable company on there and trying to spell your name. I use the phonetic alphabet a lot for my name, but when I'm talking to somebody on the phone, even, But this is the international language in which they want you to pronounce letters. So, actually, the other thing.
Are you showing anything on your screen you're supposed to be?
I will.
You're not sharing your screen?
Yeah,
okay.
I will be in just 1 second. Trying to find. Trying to find some extra stuff other than just the phonetic alphabet.
Well, I'm not going to make any suggestions here.
I appreciate that.
I'm
You
just
have
going to
to
stay
do it.
muted for the rest of the night.
You have to do it backwards.
There you go. Okay, here we go. This is what I was looking for. Okay. So, I'll turn on the screen here. We'll make these all big and juicy. Okay. So, pronunciation of the numbers, okay? So, when we're talking over a line, this is how we need to pronounce our numbers. Some people get a little crazy with it, and it's just like a little too much. But when we're talking to air traffic control or to pilots, whatever, this is how we want to pronounce our numbers, okay? So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, niner, and then decimal. Some people get real crazy with them, and it's like, wow, you're really good at this, aren't you? But 100, 1,000, really pronunciate that T, 1,000. But that's good practice just to help you guys speak clearer over a line. The thing that I really want you guys to look at, though, is this phonetic alphabet. I want you guys to memorize it. It's really not that hard to memorize. But this is super important in aviation. It's not Albert. It's not, dog. It's Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta Echo Foxtrot Golf Hotel. Like, you need to use the proper phonetic verbiage for letters and numbers when speaking to pilots and to air traffic control and stuff like that, in order to make sure that they understand you and hear you correctly. So, I mean, air traffic control, when we talk to them, when we call up that aero data, or not aero data, flight data. You know, when we say Sky West, it's always on this strip. It's always going to be placed SKW. We're not going to say SKW. We're going to say Sierra Kilo Whiskey, right? To help them identify what aircraft or what flight they're looking at. Were you going to say something, Rich? Or Rex? I'm sorry.
Oh, just one of my smart aleck remarks. I was just going to say D really screws up American Airlines pilots.
Yeah. Yep. Delta somehow won the deal on that one. but yeah, this just will allow for clear communications when you're speaking to anybody in aviation. So this is a universal language that everybody uses, whether you live in Russia, Bulgaria, France, wherever. This is how you're going to talk. So, but yeah, so please memorize that. I'm going to place both of these on the Google Drive. The other thing was like with when you're reading flight levels. Hold on. No, don't look. Let's see. Okay, so when we're reading flight levels, you'll see FL 260. Okay, oops. That's how you'll see it. Okay, so when we read this over a line, we're going to read it flight level 260 or 26,000. Okay, if we're trying to say 26,000, we want to say 26,000, not 26,000. Things like that are really going to clear up our communications over lines, and they won't have to ask you what was that again. You know, you want to be clear, concise, and to the point. We don't want to have any errors, because errors can really make a big difference in aviation. And it's the same with like flight level 10,000 feet. It's not 10,000 feet. It's not 10,000. It's 10,000, right? So just practice things like that. They're going to help you out in the long run. But anyways, so that's pretty much my spiel for today. It's 9 o'clock, so we'll just do that PowerPoint tomorrow. But please practice this. Please read that air traffic control thing. Make good use of the extra time here to to get some of this extra homework done. So, and then study for the test. I'll post that quiz review on YouTube, and then I'll take it down in the morning. But yeah, study for the quiz, whatever you need to do tonight. So, any questions, comments? Then we'll call it a night.